BS Free Witchcraft is a production of the Nerd and Tie Podcast Network. Nerd and Tie produces podcasts ranging from actual play to true crime, and you can find more at nerdandtie.com or join our Discord by going to nerdandtie.com/Discord.
We now live in a era, I'll just say, or a period of time in which, witchcraft is trending, and there's this whole idea about anyone can be a witch, everyone's a witch, nothing special has to happen, and then that kind of gives people the wrong idea about what is necessary for some of this work. And it can sometimes be really hard for new people who don't feel connected to the work because they feel like automatically they should have all the plugins for it. So if you feel like you are starting your witchcraft journey and you're like, I don't know, I just don't feel connected, I'm not really that into it, I don't like it, it's okay for you to not participate in it. Because when it comes to witchcraft, those who are really, please hear me out when I say this, those who are really meant to do it in the way that, everyone can learn to do art, but then there are people who are just meant to be artists. And so those who are really kind of born to do this work, the work will reach out and grab them. And it usually happens when they're pretty young, but sometimes it does happen later in life. People will awaken to it at a different time, but spirit will come and find you and grab you and show you what it is that they want. And so for me, it happened very young, where it was coming out of me all the time. I was dreaming of future events. Me making it rain was a very controlled aspect of it. Even to this day, I suffer with issues like I get really sad and the bathroom floods.
Welcome to BS Free Witchcraft, your monthly guide to the modern witchcraft movement, minus a lot of the usual, bullshit. I'm your host, Trey Dorn, and what you just heard at the beginning of this episode was a clip from the podcast Invoking Witchcraft. And it's not a recent episode, it's one from a while back, but in it they are discussing what makes someone a witch, and I don't really agree with what they're saying there. They're talking about someone needing to be open to spirit to truly be a witch. And if you listen to this show, you know that I fundamentally disagree with that limited of a definition. But that disagreement prompts the question, what exactly is a witch? How do we define a witch? How do we define a witch? Well, that's what we're talking about today. But before we get to the topic, I do have a little bit of housekeeping to do. This is the June 2022 episode, and as those of you who have been listening to the show for a while know that every July I do a Q&A / feedback episode, and that means I need questions from you, the listener. And while I do have some, I would like more. I would like more. So if you would like me to answer your question on the show, all you have to do is go to bsfreewitchcraft.com/contact, fill out the form, put your question there, and if you get that to me before July 15th, I may include it in the episode. I always anonymize the questions. I do not say the name of the person asking. But so if you're worried about anonymity, I can give you as much anonymity as you need. I won't say your name, and please, obviously, though, don't include any details in the question. You wouldn't be okay, being public. So, go to bsforwitchcraft.com/contact. And again, if you get that question to me before July 15th, I can include it in the episode, potentially. And these Q&A episodes are actually really important for the show, because a lot of episode topics that I've ended up doing over the years have come out of questions that I didn't think that we needed to cover something, but then I got questions about it for that Q&A episode, and that's led to entire episodes. Like the example I usually give is the gender and witchcraft episode. I probably wasn't going to do that episode if it weren't for the fact that I got a question about it in one of the Q&A episodes. So please, I would love to hear your voice and know what you want me to know and answer the questions that you have. So yeah. Anyways, back to fundamentally defining what a witch is, I guess. So that's what we're going to try to do here. Now, if you go all the way back to episode 1 of this podcast, where I did kind of the basics episode where I ran through a bunch of definitions of things, I did give a definition of a witch. I did. So let's, rather than just reiterate it and reread it, why don't we go back to Trey from a couple of years ago answering this very question. What is a witch? Oh boy, we're going to start out with the easy and hard one. A witch is anyone who practices some sort of witchcraft. That's it. It's not a gendered term, so if you're a man, a woman, non-binary person, or any other flavor of human being I forgot to mention, you can be a witch. Anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong, and I've got sources to back it up. So of course that was exceptionally vague because it relies on a definition of witchcraft. So just for completion's sake, here is my definition of witchcraft from that same episode. So what is witchcraft then? This is harder to answer. Like, I don't think I've ever really thought that hard about it. If I'm forced to label it, witchcraft is kind of the umbrella term for any kind of magic work with its roots in folk magic. Be it directly derived from or only vaguely inspired by it, that's where it comes from. Kind of. Maybe sort of. Beyond that, I kind of know it when you see it. So yeah, witchcraft is doing magic stuff. That's what I got. It's a really imprecise definition, and it's just, you can tell by feel. It's witchcraft. If you're doing, some people like to separate like thelemic stuff and like things that are, you know, much colder as separate from witchcraft, and I guess you could do that, but really, if you're doing any sort of nature-linked revivalist magical thing based on folk magic in some way, shape, or form, that's witchcraft. And yeah, that was a terrible answer. I'm sorry. And I did leave one thing out in those definitions, and that is that witch is a self-selected term. It is a label you choose for yourself. We'll get to why that's important in a minute, but I would be remiss to not point that out. All right? So, you'll notice these are broad umbrella definitions. These are not specific. And if we go back to that clip at the beginning of the episode, that episode of Invoking Witchcraft, and again, I'll link that in the show notes so you can listen to the whole context of their conversation on that show. But I think that the one thing that they're doing in that episode is the biggest mistake a lot of us make, and that is assuming that every kind of witch is like us. It is the classic blunder, especially in conversations between witches and witchcraft spaces, is the assumption that everyone's witchcraft is either looks like ours or is supposed to look like ours. Because witchcraft is a very broad term. You know, I'm a Wiccan. For me, my spiritual experience and my faith are very fundamental parts of my witchcraft, right? They are. It is key to my experience with magic and spell work and witchcraft. However, that doesn't make a secular witch any less deserving of the title, right? I mean, friend of the show and fellow Nerd and Tie Network participant, Brina Guerin, who hosts Hex Positive, is a secular witch. And I our witchcraft looks very different. Like, we have similar attitudes in like life, but our witchcraft actually looks very different from each other. Like how we practice, what we do in our practice, and how we connect with it. It is very different. And if we held each other to each other's standards, we wouldn't meet them. Right? Like, the way that she practices doesn't look like the way that I practice, but we're both using the title of witch because we're both performing some form of magic. And like, that's where I get into that episode where they're talking about like spirit or compelling, and that like, oh, you have to, and like you have to, like, to really feel like you're a witch, it has to be something that compels you and drives you, and you couldn't do it without it, and all this stuff. And I'm just sitting here going like, that is your experience. And I think it's great that you're having this experience, and well, assuming it's fulfilling. If it's awful, then I'm sorry you're having an experience. But based on based on the host's general attitude, I'm assuming it's fulfilling and great. But they bring in the metaphor of an artist, and I think it's a better metaphor than they realize, because they talk about it as like this spark, this talent, this drive, and they compare it to being an artist. Except I don't know how many artists this person actually knows, because there is a fiction about artists. There is this fiction that artists are just like spring forth with all of this talent, skill, and creativity. I have known many artists in my life. I have many friends who have professionally, lived off of their art. I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as an artist, although I did produce, before this podcast, I was best known on the internet as a webcomic artist. Because I did a semi-popular webcomic for 10 years, unconventional. It's super niche, but it had a very devoted fan base, and I've been guests at events because of it. So, like, obviously my art was up to somebody's task. And so as a person who has spent a lot of my life drawing and has had people pay me money for it, and because of those situations has therefore also known people who I would describe as artists, who are far more skilled than I am. And I use that word deliberately. Any of them will tell you that art is a skill that you have to develop. And while some people start out ahead of the curve and with natural gifts and talents, no one is a great at it without practice and learning. Like, the reason why I know a lot of people who are excellent artists, and the reason why they're so good at it, is because they have spent hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands of hours creating that art. And that practice hones a skill. Some of them went to school for it and learned techniques and learned and had put themselves in environments with the opportunity to learn and hone those skills. And I have seen people go from being mediocre artists to great ones. I have known people over the years whose art I have seen evolve and become better and better and better. And the myth is that people are just born able to create masterpieces. And that is bullshit. So that's actually why I find the artist metaphor more suiting to argue against this person's point than for it. Because, yes, actually, I agree. Witchcraft is exactly like art. Some people start ahead of the curve. Some people find themselves with natural gifts. But anybody, if they want it bad enough and practice hard and keep going, can eventually get at least decent at it. You may never be the greatest who ever lived, and it's going to take some people more work and more practice to get there than others. But to say that To say that anyone is gifted in a way that is special, it's coming from a very specific point of view, and it is, in my experience, one of naivete. This is a person who, for him, I think his pronouns are he, him. Maybe I'm wrong. It came easily to him, and so he assumes that for anyone else, that it doesn't come easy to them, that they shouldn't be doing it. And that's just incorrect. Now, I do want to say, there are plenty of people who will say try witchcraft and find that they don't enjoy it, and find that, yes, it is difficult for them, and that they don't want to keep doing it. And there's absolutely no shame in that. There is no shame in that whatsoever, to practice some sort of witchcraft and go, I'm not feeling this, I'm not enjoying this. That's fine. If you decide not to keep doing it. If you decide to stick with it, that's also fine. I, in my life, have achieved many things because I'm a stubborn jackass. I am firmly in the corner of every stubborn jackass out there. But to view it as whether one should or shouldn't, whether one can or can't, that's where you get me. I think that it can be a determinator in whether someone wants it, but not whether or not you're capable of it. And it's a real simplistic look at things. Also, again, there's the assumption that a person doing witchcraft, is trying to do the same kind of witchcraft that person is. Because not every kind of witchcraft looks the same. Because most forms of modern witchcraft are either, you'll get things like the transcendentalist stuff that, you'll get, but you also find variations of folk magic that have been handed down. And believe it or not every form of folk magic requires someone to have this deep spiritual revelatory experience. Sometimes you're making the charm because that's what your grandmother showed you how to do, and that's what her grandmother showed her how to do, and you just do the thing. You follow the recipe. You follow the instructions. And it works. That doesn't require you have some grand moment. Now, when I'm talking about folk magic, and as I said before, witch is a title we only give to people who choose the title of witch. And there have been forms of folk magic that have existed since the beginning of people, right? It's some sort of folk magic has existed since people have existed. And there's this habit I have seen in modern witchcraft circles, and that is to refer to those ancestors, those forebearers, those people who came before us, and even people who still practice that folk magic now as witches. And you shouldn't fucking do it. It's just, don't fucking do it. Witch is a self-selected title, but more importantly, prior to the 20th century, it was a title that nobody wanted. Witch was a reclaimed word. All right, the modern witchcraft movement took the word witch back. Prior to it, it was an accusation. It was a crime. It was a thing that somebody was called. It was, dare I say, a slur to people who would... A folk magic practitioner 150 years ago would be deeply insulted if you called them a witch. It's just, and we don't fall into the Margaret Murray cult here either. Don't get me into this witch cult nonsense. Witch is a title that nobody called themselves. It was a thing they'd be accused of. It was a crime. It was It was bad. And so and there are people today practicing those folk magic techniques who do not have any positive connotations with the word witch, and so don't call them one. Only the person gets to decide if they are a witch. Only the practitioner gets to decide if they carry the word witch. Now, we love that word in the modern witchcraft movement. It's an empowering word to take. It is an empowering word to put upon yourself, but not everybody feels that way, and it is disrespectful to apply that word to anyone who does not choose it. So, we do not refer to to those historical practitioners of folk magic as witches because they did not want the word, and we don't refer to any modern practitioner as a witch if they do not choose the title themselves. And I cannot say that emphatically enough. So a witch is anyone who does witchcraft. Witchcraft is a variety of things, usually folk magic inspired, not always directly, but you're a person who does magic who calls themselves a witch. That's all it is to be a witchcraft. And if you think it has to be the kind of magic that you specifically do yourself and no other kind of magic counts, I'm sorry, but you're not in charge. I'm not in charge. Neither one of us, no one is in charge. That's the whole point. We are witches. We are a culture of people who don't have authority over each other. That's not to say there are no rules. The rules exist, but they exist within a tradition, right? Like, a specific group or tradition has rules for that group or tradition, but because witch is an umbrella term that covers many traditions and none of us have larger claim to it over anyone else, all that matters is the person is doing some sort of magic, no matter how complicated, great, or stupid it is. They get to be a witch and gets called. They can be really wrong about shit all the time, as long as they're doing some sort of witchcraft and want to be called a witch. They're a witch. That's it. I know it's a lot of episode to get to that, but yeah. Yeah, and also, like, I know that this is just an aside, and it has to go with that opening thing, and it's like, let's avoid chosen one narratives while we're at it. Like, the self-aggrandizing I see in some of this stuff, it's just, like, I feel like some of it's like to set up the person speaking as an authority of like, oh, and I had this grand moment, I was compelled and all this, and then like, were you? Because you're really trying to argue it hard for me, and like, I admit I sometimes feel like a hypocrite when I feel skeptical about people saying that, because I myself had an epiphanal moment where I suddenly felt connected to the universe, blah, 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 blah. But I feel weird telling people about it. Like, that was a deeply personal moment for me. I think I detail it back in episode 2, like the most detail I'm ever going to do, I think I did way back in episode 2. And you can go, I won't play that clip, it's long, you can go back and find it. But, like, the full details of that experience and the full details of most of my experience with that sort of thing are never going on this podcast or in public, because those are mine. Those are personal. And I believe anybody is capable of having those experiences, and I also think they're not required. I don't think anyone needs to have the experiences I did to be just as much a witch as me. I think it's ridiculous to hold that as a requirement. Yeah. If you want to be a witch, just do some witchcraft and call yourself one. And anyone else who's putting up any other hurdles than that can shut up. Now, again, I want to be clear. There are forms of witchcraft that have requirements, rules. Some require initiation. Some require, study. Like, I'm not saying you can be every kind of witch. But if you really want to be a witch, there is some sort of witch you can be. And while you can gatekeep a tradition, you can't gatekeep that word. Beyond, the basic definition of you have to do something that you'd call witchcraft. Anything. Just, something. Yeah. I originally planned on doing something else this month, but that someone showed me that episode and I just needed to. Yeah. Anyways, thank you guys so much for listening to yet another month of the show. Again, next month is our Q&A episode, and if you want your question to be answered on the show, if you want a chance at that, please make sure that it's sent in by July 15th, 2022. If you miss that deadline, it is possible that I will save your question for a future feedback episode down the road, but if you want it answered on this year's episode, July 15th, 2022 is when you have to get it into me. I would like to remind you guys that the show is supported by listeners like you. Frankly, without your support, I probably wouldn't be able to pay the bills on the show. So, of course, I want to thank my Patreons at the quote-unquote shout-out tier of Stephanie Graves, Lindsay Dosey, Bruce Norville, Courtney, Amber Schmidt, and Echo of Truth, and Claire Dennis. If you would like to contribute to the show, you get these episodes a whole week early, and you can give anywhere starting from $1 on up, and just go to patreon.com/TRAEGORN and contribute. We are slowly getting closer. We are getting closer to a tier where I'm going to have to do a special live stream, and I don't want to. So, I don't know how much to promote the contributing to the Patreon, because every time we keep getting like playing chicken with this one level, and then it'll go back down, and it goes back up, and it goes back down. And so, if we hit $150 on the Patreon, I will do a live reading and react stream to Silver Ravenwolf's To Ride a Silver Broomstick. And don't make me do it, but on the other hand, make me do it. It should be actually really funny. But again, I don't think we're going to hit that anytime soon. Prove me wrong. Anyways, if you can't afford to give to the Patreon, I understand. Please just consider then sharing the show with your friends. Show it to other people. Follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter at TRAEGORN. I'm on Tumblr at TRAEGORN.tumblr.com. I'm on TikTok with the username TRAEGORN. And if you want to follow the show on Facebook, it's facebook.com/BSFreeWitchcraft. Just go to the page. Do not find my personal Facebook page. Just a reminder, because people keep trying to. That's where I talk to my mom. But if you want to follow the show on Facebook, BS Free Witchcraft is facebook.com/BSFreeWitchcraft. So, and remember, this show is a part of the Nerd and Tie Podcast Network. We have a lot of different podcasts on the Nerd and Tie Podcast Network, including the great show Let's Be Legendary. Let's Be Legendary is a 5th edition actual play podcast hosted by some great people, some friends of mine. And they update fortnightly with episodes, and it is a Weird West queer romance show. I don't know how to better describe it than that. It's really fun, and it is one of the many great shows on our network. And you can find them at nerdandtie.com/legendary, and you can find all the Nerd and Tie podcasts at nerdandtie.com, because it's a network that we're a part of. Yeah. So with that, Magicians, I will talk to you guys in July, and hopefully I'll be directly responding to some of you. So neat, exciting, and all of that. And always remember, dirt in our fingernails, brick in our hands.